In this module, we will study different phases in software development. Basically, the phases are the various steps in the software development life cycle. You will recall that while talking about software processes, we had mentioned about software development process as consisting of various steps or phases, and each step we had said consists of a specific activity to be performed. In this module, we will go in details of these various phases. The different phases or the main steps that we will look at in this module are listed here. These are problem definition, where we try to define the problem we are studying and which we plan to solve through the software development. Next step is the feasibility study, where, as the name suggests, we try to establish the cost effectiveness of the solution that we are proposing. The third step is the analysis phase, in which we try to clearly define the responsibilities or the functions that the software must undertake or perform. The next step is the system design phase, followed by the detailed design, then implementation and the maintenance. So, these are the different steps, and we will study each one of them in some more detail. A separate planning step may also be necessary for large projects. In fact, such a step may be explicitly introduced in the life cycle, either as a part of feasibility or after the feasibility step. Naturally, the plan will be reviewed continuously. Now, these are the different steps, and you must also remember what we said earlier, that every step results in a documentation which acts as a milestone in the whole life cycle. So, we will also study what are the outputs of these phases, what exactly is performed and how it is performed. This is what we mean by studying the different steps in a software life cycle. So, let us begin by talking about the first step, the problem definition. In this, the simple question that we ask ourselves is, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Who has faced this problem? Where exactly in the organization the problem has been felt? So, the idea in this particular phase is to meet users and the management and try to establish that there indeed is a problem to be solved. If all agree that there exists a problem and it needs to be solved, then it becomes a project. It becomes a project to be either implemented through software or whatever other means. So, clearly the first step, which may be a very brief step, the objective is to clearly define the goal for the project, and once we establish that there is a problem to be solved, we say that it becomes a project. And when we say it becomes a project, the commitment of funds and resources is implied. Now, after meeting the users and management briefly, we try to prepare a statement of problem. This statement of problem is a small document, not very extensive, but it is still very important because it is the first deliverable in the life cycle. It avoids subsequent misunderstanding, and we get concurrence from the users and the management that we are focusing on a problem, and we look forward to continuing this as a project if we find it cost effective subsequently. So, it is usually a short document, maybe 1 or 2 pages only. Another important thing that we do during this phase is to estimate quickly the possible cost and schedule for the next step which we will take up, which is the feasibility step. So, problem definition phase will establish the problem, will define the problem. Now, we have to investigate it further. The next step which follows the problem definition is the feasibility step, we need to commit resources for this. The management has to set aside some cost and funds for this. So we try to tell them at this point how much would it cost and what time it will take in order to carry out the feasibility step. This project cost gives the users a sense of commitments towards effort and money. At this point, they should be very clear that in order to solve this problem, they have to have resources. For example, if an organization proposes to computerize for whatever reason all the different functional areas such as sales, manufacturing, marketing, payroll, finance and so on. Now this is a large project. Do they have the resources? Do they have the management approval for taking up such a large project? What do they have in mind? What would it cost them to undertake this project? Now if the project may cost, let's say 10 crore rupees and may take 2 years of implementation effort, whereas the user feels that it can be done in a few lakh rupees and maybe in a few months, then there is clearly a gap. And in this case, there is no point in proceeding further because the users in this case do not have the necessary resources to undertake the project. So as early as possible in the project, we should try to give a scope of commitments to the users. What are the effort and cost involved if at all we want to proceed further? There should be no misconception on the part of the user that any problem can be solved in very limited time and resources. Naturally, these estimates are very preliminary at this stage and they are based on the experience of the analyst or the computer expert who is called to prepare the problem definition phase. So naturally, we are inviting somebody from the development organization or internal development department whose responsibility is to develop the software. We are trying to get a quick estimate from them, and only if we have the necessary resources as indicated by the scope at this point in time, we proceed further. Otherwise, it is better to close the project or stop the project at this point. This step, as I said earlier, is short. It generally lasts a day or two. Usually, even if you call an outside organization to do the development, for this step, no payments are involved. You are trying to call somebody at a fairly high level from the development agency who has considerable experience in the type of organizations we have and the type of problem we are facing, so that he can come and quickly understand our problem, give us a scope of the project and allow us to make up our mind whether to convert it into a project and make commitments towards the effort and the cost. Now, in this phase, we are trying to understand the problem. It's also important to characterize the problem. What exactly is the cause of the problem for which the user has called the development agency and they have software development as a possible solution in mind? So how do we characterize the problem faced by the organization or the user? Understanding this would help us in taking up a very focused investigation in subsequent phases. Otherwise, the success would be unlikely. We may end up solving a wrong problem and the user may not accept the solution because it does not meet his purpose. So, in order to ensure some kind of success in the project, it is better to characterize the problem at this stage. Now, how do we characterize? Typically, the various problems that users face and where software solutions are found to be appropriate, we can classify these problems in few categories which are listed here. The first is that the existing system has poor response time. That what it means is that the user is unable to process the transactions in the required time. Take an example that you are trying to, let's say, book a railway ticket. How long does it take once you approach the window and give your requisition, how long does it take to complete the whole work? That is what we would mean by response time. Response time is a time required to process a query or a request from the user. When this time is too large, we say that the system is slow. This may be the reason to change the existing system, and this may be the reason for undertaking the software development, because the existing system, which may be a manual system, is too slow. The second reason is that it is unable to handle the workload. That means that there are so many transactions or so many people demanding the service that we are unable to handle the workload. There are long queues and things like that. Or it could be problem of cost. The existing system is uneconomical. We would like to make it more cost effective. Or the problem could be that of accuracy and reliability. Or it may even be that the system today does not produce the required information. It does not meet the needs of the user. And finally, it could be the problem of security, that the data in the system is not adequately protected. Now, once we characterize the problem facing the user in one of these categories, we can think of an appropriate solution from our past experience where we have built solutions for such kind of problems. You should also note that these different problems that we have listed here are not necessarily disjoint, but still the focus of the project can be categorized in one or two categories from here, which can be very useful to us in subsequent phases. Now, after completing this phase, in which what we have tried to do is to identify the problem, give the scope to the user in terms of cost and effort, and also try to characterize the problem. After completing these subtasks, we are now in a position to prepare this short document called problem definition document. Let us see what it contains. It will contain a title for the project. It will give a problem statement, which is a concise statement of problem faced by the user. You do not write too much here. A few lines should be adequate. Then you state the objectives of the project, where we indicate what problem we are trying to solve and what do we want to achieve in the solution, right? How would we characterize a successful solution to the problem? And then we list any preliminary ideas that we may have encountered during our discussions with the users or from our past experience. We give the scope of the project, which consists of some ballpark figures in terms of cost and effort. We also indicate the time and cost it would take for the feasibility step. So, these are the 6 important points that you cover in the problem definition document. Some important points to note here: we should not confuse between the problem and the solution. For example, developing computerized payroll system is not a problem. In fact, it is a solution. Problem could be that we are unable to handle the workload consisting of large number of employees for whom we have to prepare the payroll. So, that is the real problem, and this could be a solution. Now, at this point, as you see, we had said that some preliminary ideas will also be recorded. We must note that no commitment to these ideas is implied, and subsequently, as we do more analysis of the project, we may explore these ideas or some other ideas as solutions may be developed. So, this completes the short phase called the problem definition phase. The whole purpose of this phase is to define the problem and check with the user whether this can be converted into a project and get his commitment to proceed further, at least up to the feasibility step. Now, let us look at the feasibility step. What exactly do we do here? feasibility step primarily is focused on understanding the problems and reasons for the existing system so that we can answer two important questions. Are there feasible solutions? And is the problem worth solving? So, we have stated the problem. For the problem that we have defined in the previous step, we are now trying to answer quickly in a limited amount of time and effort, for which the user has agreed to undertake the feasibility study phase. During that, we want to answer these two important questions. So, these two questions actually are the purpose of the feasibility study step. We do consider here different alternatives. Given a problem, there may be many ways by which we can address, and these alternatives may have different cost and benefits. So, we need to estimate them and we need to analyze these. Idea is that you do not present to the user a single option. You may give him different options which may have different benefits, which may have different costs, and you leave it to the user to decide which is the best alternative. Now, in order to do this cost and benefit analysis, you really need to understand the problem in some more details. You need to do a quick analysis and design in your mind, estimate the kind of effort which will be required to complete the whole project. What it really means is that we are actually covering all the steps of the software development methodology in a capsule form. Without spending too much time and effort, we will, in the feasibility study phase, we will do a quick design, look at different possible technologies that we may deploy, total development effort and so on, and prepare a detailed cost and benefit analysis. So, purpose is still the cost and benefit analysis. We are not trying to implement here any solution. We are not doing an extensive analysis and design. We do all these other steps in a capsule form. It is like going through the whole software development process quickly without developing anything to get a good idea of cost and benefits. So, that is why we said that we are doing the whole methodology in the capsule form. We then make a formal report and present it both to the management and the users. And in this presentation, we put all the alternatives to them and check whether any of the alternatives will be acceptable to the user. We also check whether we are still on the right track and that we are solving the right problem which we had identified earlier. And another important question is that does any solution promise a significant return? Now, this is an important issue since the users are investing funds in developing a solution. Is he going to get good returns here? So, this is one issue that the analyst or the software developer has to clearly work out and present his findings to the users and the management, so that they can take up and they can choose a correct alternative for going with the project further. Finally, when you meet the users and management, they would select an alternative. Many projects actually may get terminated here for various reasons, because alternatives are not acceptable or the cost is too high and the benefits are too little. So, if these are the reasons, then this is the best time to stop the project from going further. If we are going further, now commitment to the project is implied. Now, there are different types of feasibilities. Firstly, we consider the economic feasibility, which is generally the most important in various projects. Will returns justify the investment in the project? That is the question we try to answer in economic feasibility. So, in this question, our idea is to evaluate what benefits I get by doing the project. Is it a good investment? Next, we examine technical feasibility. is technology available to solve the problem? Usually this is not a major issue unless you are talking about application such as Star Wars or something, where we are not exactly sure what technologies are required and what algorithms need to be developed in order to meet the requirements that users may have in mind. So technical feasibility is also important, but in most of the problems that we address today for the users, this is generally not a question. Finally, there is a operational feasibility. Will it work in the user's organization? That means whatever solution that we prepare, will it be accepted by the organization as per its rules, regulations, laws, organization culture, union agreements? All of these need to be considered in order to see the operational feasibility of the solutions that we are proposing. So there are three types of feasibilities: economic feasibility, technical feasibility, and the operational feasibility. And all of these have to be considered in proposing different alternatives. Now let's look at the costs. Now costs can be again characterized in different ways. They may be one-time cost, which include equipment, training, software development, site preparation, and so on. So these are the costs which are one-time costs. Then there can be recurring costs, which would include salaries, maintenance of equipment, depreciation, and so on. And finally the replacement of the system after some period of time. So there are one-time costs, there are recurring costs. Another way of classifying the cost would be fixed costs and variable costs. Variable costs are those which change with the volume of the workload. So we may associate the cost factor with the load on the system. So idea is here to quantify the costs, which may be of different categories, and the analyst has to look forward in the different alternatives that he is considering, what equipment he may need to buy, how much effort he may have to spend on software development, what would it cost to prepare the site or the training of the users. So get all these costs identified for each alternative and make a list of these different types of costs which the user need to incur in solving the problem. What are the different types of benefits? Now benefits may be tangible or intangible. Tangible benefits are those which can be measured. We call them savings also. So savings are tangible benefits which include savings in salaries, savings in inventory cost, or ability to produce more for a given amount of investment, or reduction in operational cost. Basically these are the savings because we can put a rupee value on each of them. But there can also be intangible benefits. Intangible benefits include those which cannot be measured, but they can be quite important in themselves for justifying a project. So some of the benefits are listed here. For example, there could be improved customer service. For example, this could be an important goal in computerization of banks, that they want the customer service to be the main focus of the computerization and the software that they plan to deploy. Improved resource utilization, better control over the activities, reduction in errors, ability to handle more workload. So these are intangible benefits which could be very important in undertaking a project. But idea is to clearly state them and identify them and let the user decide whether an intangible benefit is strong motivation for undertaking a project. Now we need to estimate costs. How can we estimate cost so early in the project? We are still doing feasibility, we have only done problem definition, and we have not yet gone into the detailed requirements, not done the design and so on, but still we need to estimate the cost. Naturally here your experience in similar domains with similar kind of problems will become very useful here. But in order to structure your estimation properly, we can try to decompose the problem into different components and estimate the cost for these different components. So, for example, you separate the cost of development from the computer systems that you may need to buy, or the networking cost, or such other factors. So, you decompose and try to estimate the cost of components rather than trying to estimate the cost of total system at one shot. Use historical data whenever it is available. Use organization's own standards for computing the overheads. Right? These overheads may be managerial overheads, secretarial support, electricity, space, and so on, or the cost of personnel. Now, these personnel may be for development, for support, for doing design, for doing training. Now, these personnel cost, again there are some organizational standards, and these costs need to be estimated as function of time, because these people will work for certain months. So, we need to estimate first for how long we require these personnel, what are the different types of person and their skills that we need, and what are the cost parameters for them. So, this is how we can structure the estimation effort for the cost depending on the different alternatives that we are considering. Now, after you have measured the benefits and you have estimated the cost, it is now time to do financial analysis based on which you will justify the project economically. That is the economic feasibility. Now, we must remember here that the costs, the investment is being made today in the project. We will buy equipment, we will pay the software developer. So, all the investments are now, whereas the benefits are in future. So, we need to consider the current value of the future benefit. So, suppose I get a benefit of 100 rupees at the end of 1 year. Now, that 100 rupees at the end of 1 year is not same as 100 rupees today. In fact, it would be less. So, if we are, let us say, assuming say 10% interest rate, then naturally it would be less by 10%. So, we need to compute the present value of the future benefit, for which we can use a formula as given here, where we reduce the future benefit by the interest rate which is available in the market today. So, our idea is that if I am spending 100 rupees, right, or if I am going to get 100 rupees benefit at the end of 1 year, what is it equivalent today? If I am going to get another 100 rupees of benefit at the end of second year, how much is it worth today? So, we try to estimate the present value of the future benefit, because we need to normalize everything. We need to bring it to one point in time, both the cost and the benefits. We also should take into account the whole life of the system. Usually software systems have a life of 5 to 7 years, and of course this also may be less where the technology advances are taking place very fast. But a reasonable life expectancy is about 5 years, at the end of which the software may have to be changed, the requirements may change so much, or the business rules may change so much that the whole software may have to be changed, or the equipment may have to be changed, the computer systems may have to be changed. So, now what we are seeing here is that we are making an investment in a system which has a fixed life, say 5 years. It will give us some benefits, but these benefits are over the next 5 years. So, we will reduce those benefits and then see whether we are recovering our investment, or whether we are making some losses or profits, by which we answer the question, is this a good project to undertake from the economical feasibility point of view. So, cost is an investment, benefits represent the return. We try to compute the payback period, that is, how long will it take for me to recover my investment through the accumulated benefits. So, in the first year I have some benefits, in the second year I have some benefits, I reduce them or I bring them to the today's value, and then see how they look at my investment, and whether in how long or in what time duration I recover all my investment. Hopefully, this payback period should be less than the system life. Otherwise, the system will be replaced and we would not have recovered our investments. This of course also may be acceptable for intangible benefit, but the point of financial analysis is to clearly tell the user what kind of benefits, accumulated benefits are possible vis-a-vis the investment that he is making, and from investment point of view whether it is a good proposal, it is a good project to do or it is not. And the user may then want to ask this question himself, that are there better investment alternatives. So, instead of investing his money in developing a software project, he may want to put his money elsewhere and get some other benefits rather than get the benefits through the software. At the end of doing all these, you try to prepare again a report which we call the feasibility study report. In this you summarize your findings. So, let me just quickly tell you what a report would consist of. It would first have an introduction part where you will state the problem, the user's environment and the kind of solutions we are proposing and the kind of constraints which are placed on the project. The constraints may be cost, effort or any other constraints in terms of available equipment and so on. So, you identify this as a part of introduction, you give an introduction to the project and the problem we are solving. Then you give a summary of your findings and you indicate your recommendations. Basically, these are the summary over different alternatives that you may have considered. Now, you present your alternatives briefly and also indicate what criteria were used by you in making your recommendation about the final approach. Now, all these alternatives that you have gone through will be presented in more details in subsequent sections. For example, for every alternative you will give a brief description of the kind of solution we are envisaging in that. You will do a cost benefit analysis of that alternative. You will also look at the technical risks, any other legal ramifications or operational risks. So, all these different alternatives would be presented in the report from economic, technical and operational feasibility point of view and any other project specific topics. So, this is the very important report which would be presented to the users and the management, and hopefully one of the alternative would be accepted by the user and you will get a clear go ahead signal to continue with the project and take up the next phase of the software development, which is the requirement analysis. So, requirement analysis is the next phase which follows the feasibility, provided one of the alternatives that you had presented to the user has been accepted by him or his management. Now, you should clearly see that this is a very natural progression that any project should go through. You must define the problem, and before you start investing in the project, you should try to answer this question, that whether it is worthwhile to do it, will I get the benefits. So, that is what precisely we are trying to do through the feasibility study, and feasibility study, as we saw, attempted to answer some important questions and also to look at some important alternatives for the solutions. Now, one of the alternative has been selected. So, we would now take up the next phase in the life cycle where we now try to understand the user's requirements in more details. So, this is the purpose of the requirements analysis phase. So, the main objective here is to determine what the system must do to solve the problem without describing the how part. Okay, so, we are focusing on the functional specification. What should the system do? How it should do that is the task we will take up during design phase. At this phase, we want to clearly specify the the objectives in terms of what is the system supposed to do. This phase is carried out by the analyst, also called the requirement analyst, and the output of this phase is a very important document called Software Requirement Specification Document or SRS document. This phase is very important because this is the base on which subsequent developments will be done. So, we must take all efforts to produce a complete and correct specification. Any mistakes at this point, incompleteness or ambiguity is going to cause problems subsequently. It might even lead to project failures or even worse, disputes with your users, that the system, the user would not accept the system that you are trying to develop. So, the goal should be very clear that you would try to specify all detailed requirements correctly and unambiguously and in sufficient details so that the whole solution can be implemented and the users would be in a position to expect a solution which meets their requirements. Now, even earlier we had said that this is one of the most challenging tasks, and for the various reasons that we have mentioned here. Very often users themselves may not know exactly what they need from the system or how computers can make their work more effective and more efficient, how it can add more value to what they are already doing today. Now, this often may not be clear to the users, but this is very important, and as analysts we often have to help users in clearly perceiving the use of computers in their work. A problem could be that users change their mind over time, or the users may have conflicting demands. They may not be in a position to differentiate between what is possible and cost effective from what is impractical. They may just have a big wish list without clearly understanding the cost implications or practicality of those. So, we need to differentiate and or help the users differentiate between what is cost effective and possible, and hopefully the feasibility must have clearly established the scope by now, but in this phase we are again going to have a more detailed contact with the users. We will try to understand their requirements, and at this point we must constantly keep in mind that we are doing project in finite cost and effort, and we must indicate requirements which are practical and cost effective. Analyst may have a difficulty because he may not have adequate domain knowledge, so he may not be able to understand the requirements which are being expressed by the user, and very often the client is different from the users. So, in all these cases, doing the requirement analysis is a challenging task, but it is a challenge that has to be accepted by the software developer, because if the SRS is not done comprehensively, then project has very little chance of succeeding. SRS is the basis for subsequent design and implementation. So, it must give a clear idea not only to the user about what to expect from the system, but it should be comprehensive enough for the designers and the developers subsequently to complete the development work. This is the first and the most important baseline. This is going to be a reference document. You can think of it as defining the contract between the developer and the user. It is going to be used as a basis for validation as well as for final acceptance of the software for the user. So, it is a very important document and must be extensive in terms of defining what the system would do for the users. Cost increases rapidly after this step, so it is important that all the defects are captured here itself, and that we do not misunderstand the requirements or the specifications, because any defect which is not captured here and which enters in the design and in the implementation is going to be much more costlier subsequently, as much as 2 to 25 times more costly to remove these defects. So, after we prepare the SRS document, it is very important to review it in details, and the review would be done both by the users and by other analysts in terms of how comprehensively the document has been prepared, whether it is detailed enough to give a clear idea to the users and for the designers also to implement the system. So, there will be a very important review which will be carried out after completing the software requirement specification. In this phase, we try to identify all functional requirements. Now, these functional requirements are specified in terms of inputs, outputs and the processing to be done. So, for example, if you are producing a pay slip in a payroll system, then what does that pay slip contain? It contains, let us say, take home pay and tax deduction. So, where are the inputs in order to do these computations? Where are those inputs coming from? And what processing, what calculations would be actually performed? Now, this is what we mean by identifying clearly all the functional requirements of a given user task. We also identify performance requirements because the system should be efficient and cost effective. Besides the functional and performance requirements, we identify any other constraints that are important. These are all catalogued and explicitly noted down. It should be adequately detailed, as we said earlier. Users should be able to visualize what they are going to get at the end, and also that the designers and implementers can proceed with the development. It generally would cover all the business rules at various levels of details. For example, the purpose is to calculate the take home pay. Then what is the business procedure for doing that? What are the allowances, deductions, taxes, rules for calculating taxes and so on. So, to that extent, when we say what and how, this what and how is actually more at the business level, and we need to specify detailed inputs, outputs and processing for each task, so that hereafter, once the SRS is completed, there is no need for the developer to come back to the user again. So, when somebody is writing the, let us say, take home pay program subsequently, you are not going to run back to the user and ask him, how do I calculate the tax? In fact, that should have been documented already in the SRS document. So, SRS is a very detailed specification to the extent that after doing the requirements phase, there need not be any contact between the developer and the user. That in fact should be one of the task that we should keep in mind, that it should be so detailed. Now, the analysis process that we take up in order to come up with this kind of an SRS will naturally consist of finding more and more about the requirements by interviewing clients and users. We must meet them and try to find out what exactly they expect and how the different computations, different outputs can be obtained, what are the procedures for them. We may have to often look at the existing documents and the current mode of operations. So, we may go through the users organization, the workflows, the different files and records that they maintain. They may have documents explaining the procedures that they follow currently. All these documents will be very useful for the analyst to understand the user's requirements. It is a long process. The analysis process may take months or weeks, months of effort from the analyst, and it is very important that you organize yourself very systematically, because you are going to interview a lot of people. You will have to correlate the information that you obtain from these different people. You will need to identify the gaps so that you can go back to them and find out more about the different functional areas. So it's a long process which need to be very systematically done. We focus on what is being done and how it is being done. We focus on different business activities, different business entities, different processing steps, such as, let's say, in a payroll, there are pay slips, there are time sheets, there are different types of business records which are kept, and we go through all of them to get more details of the user's requirements. We need to obviously identify the various users and the business entities once the scope of the problem is clearly defined, and we need to, through the interview process that we just now mentioned, get the functional knowledge. And if large number of users have to be interviewed, naturally that may be difficult. We may prepare questionnaires and get their feedback through the questionnaires. Existing system study, where we go through the existing forms, outputs, various records kept in the, let's say, the clerical departments or support departments. We go through all of them and examine the complete existing system in details if such a system is available. We often proceed in the manner of going from outside to inside. That means we think of the whole system or the project as a single black box, and we study it first at the boundary. That is, what are the outputs which are being produced, and then we go in more depth. So for those outputs, which inputs are necessary? Once we know the outputs and inputs, then what processing is done? So primarily in the analysis process, our approach is to go from outside inwards, and this helps us in taking one task at a time, one output at a time. So we go from the boundary of the system inside and try to find out more about what data is kept, what inputs are required, and what processing is done by looking at different outputs which the system has to produce. The process of interviewing is a very important process, and it is the one technique that analysts will use extensively. They identify their users, the roles which are played by the users, they plan the interview properly, and identify what information they are collecting, what is the purpose of the interview. So naturally, in a single interview you are not going to find out everything. You will have to plan multiple interviews with multiple users, and progressively and systematically you will have to collect information from the users. Conducting interviews is an art. You have to define the scope of every interview, the duration, the purpose. You need to systematically keep records, and whatever you identify, you should again confirm it with the users. You need to sometimes prompt the users in visualizing their requirements. So through this process of a continuous dialogue with the users, you need to define the problem in more details and identify the requirements. You naturally need good communication skills. You need some domain expertise. That means you should be already familiar with the business of the users, so that the terminology and the processes that he describes to you, you can quickly understand. And finally, you should have good patience. You must organize the findings. You are going to collect lot of data in the process of analysis. This amount of data you must systematically store. You must classify it properly, so that your findings which will be spread over months, and naturally all the analysis work may be done by a team of people. You may not be doing the whole of analysis, so there are number of people who are doing the analysis work. They are finding out a lot about the user's requirements. We need to organize it systematically, record it, classify it, maybe even conceptualize it at different levels of details. There are tools and repositories which are available, and you can make use of them. The advantage of these tools and repositories is that as you find out more and more about every input, output, different files and records which the users keep, the computations they perform, all this information, as and when we collect, we can record it in the tool. Another important advantage of using the tool is that they can help you in checking consistency and completeness. So, it is possible that some outputs were identified, but you have never investigated them in enough details to identify the inputs and the computations which need to be performed. So, these tools can help you in not only systematically recording different findings, but you can also use these tools in checking the consistency and completeness of the work which has been done so far, and wherever you see the gaps, you can take up that activity in subsequent investigations. One way of systematically organizing yourself is to build various models. The models help you in handling the complexity in a systematic fashion by using the universal divide and conquer kind of a principle. And also important thing about models is that they allow you to focus on certain aspects and hide unnecessary details. So, you can create models which address only specific aspects of the domain. For example, about the data or about only the processing. There are models available which help you in this. Model building is very useful for understanding the domain, for reducing the errors, and for ensuring consistency and completeness. Many of the models give you some diagramming tools which make it very easy and very systematic to understand the requirements, and we will look at some of these models subsequently. One of the very important model that is used is the data flow diagrams. Data flow diagrams represent the different processing steps, and they also indicate what data is used in which processing steps. So, data flow diagrams are very useful. We will study them in some more details, using which you try to understand the processing part of the user's requirement. Then another important model is the entity relationship model. This is used for understanding the data or the information domain of the user. There are then object oriented models. So, there are different types of modeling paradigms which are available to us, and as we do analysis, we try to understand what we have found out in terms of these models. They help us in systematically organizing what we have found out about the problem domain or the organization of the user, and gives us a very clear idea of what is happening in the business environment for which we are trying to develop a software. So, let me summarize what we have seen in this particular lecture. We started by saying that we want to study different steps which are typically used in software development, and we talked about the problem definition step, where the idea is to quickly understand the problem faced by the user and give him an idea of the scope, what kind of effort and cost will be involved in order to address that problem. Then we talked about the feasibility study, which is very important to decide whether we go further or not. Now, assuming that one of the alternatives that you have proposed has been accepted and the user has the resources to undertake the project, then we do a very important first step called the analysis phase. And the purpose of the analysis phase is to know more and more about the requirements of the user. The idea would be to produce the software specification document at the end of this, which will be detailed enough to tell the user what he can expect from the software, and also give us enough details to build the solution in more details. So, we were discussing about the different techniques by which we can carry out this analysis, and how we will focus on inputs, outputs, processing, get more data, and systematically catalog it and classify it properly, so that all this can be prepared into a systematic document. And we talked about the different models which we can use, and as I said just now, these models will be taken up in more details subsequently. What we will do next time is to look at the document format. How is the SRS document specified? Because it is one of the very important deliverables from the analysis phase.